Hi, and welcome to another video by Jim the Car Guy. Today we have a 2010 Honda Accord that was just dropped off and into my building, and the customer tells me they got in the vehicle, turned the key, and it does absolutely nothing. It doesn't crank, it doesn't do anything. They also tell me that they were driving along last night and the battery light came on, and as they were driving everything started slowing down and it died. So all right, let's turn the key, we'll see what it does, and then we'll figure out what we have to do. I already have a suspicion it's going to be an alternator, but we're going to check just to see what it does. So, all right, let's see. No doubt about that. It definitely has an issue with it because I turned the key and it does absolutely nothing. I know the battery is dead, so I can tell by the dashboard lights that they're very dim. So let's charge the battery up with a charger. Once we get a little bit of a charge back into it, we'll come back and we'll figure out what's going on. So all right, get a cup of coffee and we're going to charge this thing up. Okay, now that we have our battery partially charged, we have all of our equipment here, so we're going to test it. Now, at the shop here, I use this machine here to actually test my battery as well as my charging system. But I also have a secondary machine here that I use. It's made by a company called Midtronics. This seems to work really well too. So let's see what the car is doing. The customer tells me they were driving along, and the vehicle actually, the check engine, the battery light came on. So let's see what happens here. That's a pretty good indication right there that the alternator is no good. Plus, I don't know if you can hear it. Sounds pretty noisy down there also. So, all right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure our belt is on. The belt is definitely on the vehicle. So, all right, let me get set up and we're going to go through the test now. Okay, first thing we're going to do before we do anything is we're going to disconnect our charger. And we're just going to see real quickly what's going on with this alternator. I got a feeling it's not charging at all because that light is lit. As you can see, it's running at 11.7 volts, which tells me we're running directly off of the battery right now. So what you want to do is you want to go down to the bottom over here first. You want to make sure all of your electrical connectors are tight. Down on the bottom right here, you want to make sure your cable is connected. You want to watch your fingers while you're working over here. We're going to just make sure our connectors are tight in the back of the alternator, which they are. You can hear that buzzing noise, like I said. We're going to pull this up. We're going to look at it. Everything looks nice and tight there. Now we're going to grab a test light and we're going to check to make sure we have power at this connector right here. So let me grab a test light and we'll come right back. Okay. And we do have power there, so we know that it actually has power going from the alternator. So we know that the connection is actually good. We're going to disconnect this tester here, and now we're going to use this tester. So let me get you set up on the tripod, and we'll come back. Okay, now our battery, like I said, is going to be weak, so we're not going to have a fully charged battery, but we're going to go through the whole procedure right now with this diagnostic equipment now. This is a fairly inexpensive piece of equipment as compared to the Snap-on. We're going to do an in-vehicle test. We're going to check the cold cranking amps. Testing it. It says charge and retest, but that's because the battery was stone dead. All right, so now we're going to do we're going to start it and test the alternator output. As you can see, it's charging 11.6 volts, 11.4 actually. Checking for charging voltage. It's not a diesel. And right there it tells you charging system problem. There's no charging voltage. Now I will tell you this. Whenever you have an alternator making that kind of a noise, 99% of the time it's going to be a bad alternator. All right, but check all your electrical connectors, make sure they're tight, and if everything is tight, then we're going to change this alternator. So, all right, let me put this up onto the lift, and we're going to pull the alternator out, and we're going to do it together. Okay, before we get started, I just want to give you an example of what kind of tools you're going to be needing. You're going to be needing a couple of ratchets, very long extensions on the ratchet would be ideal. It gives you a little more leverage. A set of sockets, metric sockets, a couple of wrenches, screwdriver, an extension for reaching some of the bolts, and I'm using my 1/4-inch set to take off some of the bolts that are on the alternator, and as well as the cover. So, all right, let's talk about what we're going to do here now in the car. As you can see, that alternator is in a fairly tight spot down there. You're probably wondering how the heck are you going to get this alternator out without disassembling all of these components in the way. So what we're going to do first before we do anything, and I'm going to do this with the camera off because I'm not going to show you this. You see these bolts right here? There's a bolt here and there's a bolt here. We need to take these two bolts out. They're down underneath the bottom, down underneath there. So we're going to lift the car up. We're going to take out the two bolts on the bottom, and then once we have those bolts out, then we'll come back and we'll continue up top. Okay, now that we have those two bolts loosened up down the bottom, we're just going to loosen these two bolts up on the top right here. Now, the ones on the bottom, they're not totally taken out. I just loosened them because the fan shroud itself is actually slotted, so I'll show you what I mean by that. So now we'll just take these two bolts out totally here. Don't lose the bolts, you're going to need to use them over again. We're going to disconnect this overflow for the coolant. We're going to pull the coolant tank up and out. It just slides onto a bracket right here, so we just slide it right out. We'll stand this off to the side. Now, before we go any further, I just want to point this out to you. Make sure that you disconnect your battery. You can take off your negative, your positive, whatever works for you. All right, now we're going to take the fan and we're going to unplug the electrical connectors from the fan itself. We're going to lift this back up and we're going to take it off from down the bottom, so we'll come right back. Okay, and then after we have the electrical contacts disconnected, which I'll show you in a second here, this is the plug right here. We're just going to unplug that from the bottom. You push the electrical pin in and you pull it right off. So we'll set this off to the side for now. Now remember what I was telling you about the slotted bottom bolts? You see how these are slotted? You don't need to take the bolts out all the way. You just loosen the two of them up so you can slide it out. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take off this cover right here just to give us a little bit more room. And you just do that with a regular screwdriver. And you can pull this out. thing we're going to do then is we're going to come down and take that alternator belt off. Now I'm going to show you what I normally do. The way you take that belt off is there's a, I'll bring you in there, I'll show you. Right down on the bottom right here, you see right down, I don't know if you can see that, but you see that 18 millimeter or 19 millimeter right there? You put the socket on there and you pry it and you can remove the belt. So we're going to pry that off, we're going to take the belt off. Alright, so we just get in here with this, just like that. Put the socket on it. And we'll pry that belt, tension it back so we can get the fan belt off. And then we can just take the belt off. And for now, what I'm going to do, we're just going to hold this belt up here so it doesn't come off. This way it doesn't come off the pulleys. Be a little bit easier later on to get it back on there. It's no big deal if it comes off. You can just put it back on, but I'm just going to hold the belt up and out of the way, just like this, so we can continue to work on the alternator. Now with the alternator, we're going to remove the electrical connectors here. The way you do that is just push in on the pin on the back, and you can rock it, just like that. And then we're going to disconnect this 10 millimeter bolt right up on top here, and then we'll take off the electrical connectors. The one on top of the alternator looks like it's going to be the 12 or 13 millimeter. Be careful not to lose the bolts. Not that it matters, but you don't want to have it caught up to something. And this, we're just going to take it off like this and out of our way, just like that. And now we're going to disconnect the alternator up on top here and then down on the bottom right down there too. So this is probably about a 12 millimeter, so we're going to take that out. Okay, now we have them both broken loose. And then I'm going to take the bolts out that hold this bracket to the top of the alternator. And we'll just move this out of the way right now. All right, then I'm going to take out the, I'll show you, I'll bring you in there, I'll show you. Okay, and we're going to take out that bolt right down there. Looks like it's about a 14 millimeter. We're going to get in there, we're going to take that bolt out. We'll pull it all the way out, and then we should be able to get that alternator out of there. So let me disconnect that bolt, and we'll continue. Now once you break it loose, then you can take the bolt out by hand. All right, now our alternator is loose. We can just take it right out of here. I will point this out. Be careful you do not puncture the radiator. So be real careful. And that's it. That's our alternator. So, all right, let's grab the replacement and we'll put this job back together. You can actually hear. You can hear some noise inside there too. All right, let's grab the new one and we'll continue. Okay, now that we have our replacement, we're going to put it back in. Make sure you match it all up to make sure it's the correct alternator. Count the amount of ribs on the splines here just to make sure it's correct. And then we're going to put it back in the car. Now be careful you don't damage that radiator again. So we're going to do it nice and slow. And then we're going to catch it in the bottom first. Okay, and we're going to catch the bottom bolt first by hand. Okay, so we're just going to catch it by hand as far as we can. Okay, now that we have the bottom core, we're not going to do anything further with that bottom bolt. We're going to reinstall that bracket on the top that we previously took off. Okay. And then we're going to catch that top bolt. Now before you tighten anything up, you want to make sure all of your bolts are caught first. So you got to tighten everything by hand first, and then we'll come in with a ratchet. and we'll tighten it with the ratchet to make sure it's nice and tight. All right, now we're going to go down to the bottom and we're going to tighten up that bolt on the bottom first. You can tighten it by hand as far as you can. And then we'll tighten up the bolts on the alternator on the bottom. Alright, so we'll tighten the bottom bolts first. Bottom is nice and tight. Now we'll tighten up the two top ones. And you're screwing into aluminum, so don't over tighten and strip it. You're just going to snug them in. That's it. Next thing we're going to do now is we're going to put our fan belt back on. Now we held our belt up like that just to make it a little bit easier for us so it doesn't get come off the rest of the pulleys down below. I'm going to hold our belt where we previously took it off. I think we're going to do it a little bit differently down here. We're going to connect onto that bolt. I'm going to just loosen it up on top here. It's going to be a little bit easier trying to get it up on top here than to try to do everything down the bottom. So we're going to put it back around the alternator and we're going to take it off on the top of the power steering here. Okay, and now we're going to hold our belt where it belongs. I'm going to pull on the tensioner so we can put the belt back on. Just like that. And then obviously just make sure your belt is on the pulleys the way it belongs. All right, so that's pretty much it. Our belt is on the way it's supposed to be right now. Let's just look down the bottom. All right, the belt is on just where it belongs right now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to reconnect our electrical that we disconnected. Okay. Now we're going to take out, there's a nut on top right here. We're just going to take that nut out, the new nut. And there's also a flat washer in there too. I'm wrong, there is no flat washer. All right, then we're going to reconnect our electrical connector where it previously came off. Push it down. And now even though you're going to see me tighten this on with a ratchet, I'm not tightening it with the ratchet, I'm doing it by hand. So put your nut where it belongs and then just snug this down until it's as tight as it can go. And then we're just going to grab a ratchet. Now you don't want to go too tight and damage anything, so you're just going to snug it down so it's snug. Like that. We're going to plug our electrical connector that we previously took out back in. It's plugged back in where it belongs. And last, we're going to reconnect our 10 millimeter right up on the top right here that we took out. Now again, you see me using a ratchet, but I'm actually turning it in by hand. Okay, nice and tight. So now we have our plugs tightened on. Our electrical connector is in place. And I'm just going to make sure that it's covered here where it's supposed to be. Everything is covered back up to where it's supposed to be. We're going to slide our radiator fan back in there now. So let me change my gloves and we'll continue. Okay, now that we have our gloves changed, we're going to take this and we're going to slide this back into those two little bolts down the bottom. Okay. And we'll catch our two bolts up on top right here. Okay, we'll tighten those bolts. You're only screwing it into these are only small little 1/4 inch bolts, so don't over tighten them and break them. Okay, now I am going to plug in the electrical connector down the bottom down here, which I'm going to do from the bottom later. Now we're going to put our overflow tank back in here. Just back on. We're going to put this cover back on like this. Screw this down. These are only plastic little clips, so don't tighten them, you're just snugging them in there. Now I'm going to lift it up, I'm going to reconnect those pieces on the bottom there, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so we got the bottom plug back in. We tightened up those two little 10 millimeters down the bottom. We have everything up top done. Most importantly, before we're going to fire this job up, we are going to let this battery charge for a good half hour, 45 minutes, just so there's a little bit of a charge, so we can check the charging system, but then we're going to charge this battery and bring it back up to 100% charge before we send it out the door. So let's let this charge up a little bit. I'm going to grab my tester, and then we're going to come right back and we're going to make sure that this job is done and out the door. Okay. We're going to reconnect our 10 millimeter bolt that we previously took off on the battery. We'll reconnect that. Okay, now Obviously, we are going to have a weak battery, but we're going to do a test on it anyway, just to make sure that the alternator is charging, just to confirm that the repair is done. You know, occasionally you will get a defective part, so it's always a good idea to retest it just to make sure. It says surface charge detected, turn headlights on. Alright, headlights are on. Now it says turn headlights off. Headlights are off. It says retesting. It does say replace battery. We're not going to do that yet because this battery was stone dead. Now we're going to start it up and check the charging system. It's always nice when you see that light off on the dashboard. All right. Charging is 13.97 volts, 14 volts. We're going to check the charging system. It says rev the engine for 5 seconds. We're not going to do that though, we're just going to wait. Testing at idle. Testing the diode ripple. Turn loads on. We're going to just hit enter again. Rev the engine for 5 seconds. We're not going to do that either. Analyzing data. Says charging system normal. 14.00 volts charging. And the diode ripple is normal. Now, let me shut this off. Okay, that's it. We're all done. We are going to let this battery charge for a couple of hours before we do a test on it again, just to confirm that the battery is good. If the battery is borderline, we are going to replace it because we don't want to put a battery in there that's weak and it's going to wind up destroying our brand new alternator. So, all right, any questions or comments? You want to talk to me about anything? You send me an email. I'll be more than happy to talk to anybody about anything. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.